So in step 2, we discussed how understanding the location and behavior of your symptoms has a high predictive value in determining the potential underlying source of your problem. Now what we're going to do is correlate your signs and symptoms with what we see structurally to arrive at a functional diagnosis. And to do that, we utilize a system whereby we place your symptoms and structure into one of 4 different diagnostic categories. And these categories are the forward pelvis syndrome, the backward pelvis syndrome, and incidentally, we're going to speak about each one of these in more detail. So we have the forward pelvis syndrome, the backward pelvis syndrome, the high pelvis syndrome, and then the forward head syndrome. These are the 4 diagnostic categories that we're going to utilize in our treatment method for back pain. So let's start with the forward pelvis syndrome. The forward pelvis syndrome is characterized by a forward rotation of the pelvis. And what that means is that if you take a look at the side view of the pelvis, the front of the pelvis would be lower than the back of the pelvis. And you see that as depicted by this line that I just drew on our model here. In addition, you're going to have tight hip flexors. These are the muscles on the front side of the hip. You're going to have weak hip extensors, and these are the muscles that move the leg backwards, and those are on the back side of the hip. You're going to have weak abdominal muscles, and then finally, you're going to have an accentuation of the lumbar curve. And what that means is that you tend to have more of a sway back. For the backward pelvis syndrome, it's usually just the opposite of the forward pelvis syndrome. So with the backward pelvis syndrome, you have a backward rotation of the pelvis. So you see the line here where the back of the pelvis is lower than the front of the pelvis. With the backward pelvis syndrome, you're going to have tight hamstrings and buttocks muscles. You're going to have weak hip flexors, and again, those are the muscles on the front side of the hip. Those muscles will be weak. You're going to have tight abdominal and chest muscles. So the abdominal muscles, the muscles right over your belly and over your pectoral region are going to become tight. And then you're going to have a flattening of that lumbar curve. So instead of having a sway back, the back is going to look like it's very, very flat. With the high pelvis syndrome, you have a little different orientation. You're going to have a high pelvis on one side and a high shoulder on the opposite side. So you see here where I depicted a high pelvis on the right side and a high shoulder on the left side with the lines that I drew across the pelvis and the shoulders. You're going to have tight hip flexors, again, those muscles on the front side of the hip. You're going to have weak hip extensors and hamstring muscles. So your gluteal muscles, your muscles in your buttocks, and your hamstrings, the muscles on the back side of your thigh, are going to be weak. You're going to have tight adductor muscles, and the adductor muscles are the muscles on the inside part of your thigh. And then you're going to have a little bit of a curvature of the spine reminiscent of a scoliosis. It's not really a true scoliosis because what's happening is that the spine is adapting to the high pelvis and shoulder on opposite sides. So the spine tends to curve and gives an orientation or a look of a scoliosis, but it's actually just a compensatory curve based on the position of the pelvis. The final syndrome would be the forward head syndrome, and the forward head syndrome is characterized by a forward position of the head in relation to the spine. So in normal circumstances, when you look at somebody from the side, a perfect posture, if you will, the ear is usually in line with the shoulder all the way down, if you were to draw a plumb line through the body. But with the forward head syndrome, if you draw that plumb line through the body, the head is going to be well forward of that plumb line, and that is the characteristic feature of the forward head syndrome. Now, in addition to that, you're going to have muscle imbalances that develop in the form of tight chest and the front part of the shoulder muscles. Your rotator cuff is going to become weak, and the rotator cuff are the group of 4 muscles that basically surround the upper arm and create the motion that we need in the upper arm. You're going to have weakness in the rear shoulder muscles, and then weakness in the shoulder stabilizing muscles. So those are the imbalances that are going to be characteristic of the forward head syndrome. So in summary, we talked about the 4 underlying conditions responsible for most back pain. Now keep in mind that although we discuss these on a case-by-case basis, the reality is that most people have at least 2 and oftentimes 3 of these conditions overlapping one another. So in other words, you could have a forward pelvis syndrome, a high pelvis syndrome, and a forward head syndrome as a cluster of signs and symptoms, and you have to treat each one of those specifically. So the keys to success then are to treat the specific condition and not the symptoms. And if those are performed consistently, you can definitely treat your back pain and end your back pain today. I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to help you understand your back pain just a little better. To find out how to treat your sciatica, neck pain, or back pain, click the button below to proceed to step 4, and we'll talk about the specific treatment methods that you'll need in order to eliminate back pain. All good health to you, and I do hope our paths cross soon.